Julian had been married to Serafina for 7 years. 7 long, celibate years. They had never once been intimate, not even on their wedding night. He had always accepted the explanation, his heart condition. She insisted that anything more than a kiss could kill him. And because he loved her, he believed it. Until last week. It was a routine physical. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the report he held now in his hand said something extraordinary. His heart was fine. Perfect, even. No structural issues. No arrhythmia. Nothing that warranted the years of medication, or the years of denial. And so, without rage or drama, only a quiet ache settling in his chest, he folded the medical report along its creases, laid it gently on the table, and picked up the phone. "Alex," he said softly, "help me draft a divorce agreement." On the other end of the line, his old friend exhaled a low whistle. "Finally giving up on your ice queen?" Julian let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I told you she wasn't the type to feel anything. 7 years and not a single night together. Come on, man, you were never going to break through that armor." Julian's voice was calm, but heavy. "You're right. I couldn't." "Come to Switzerland," Alex offered easily, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You still look like a damn Calvin Klein model. I'll introduce you to someone who doesn't treat you like a fragile vase." Julian nodded to himself and ended the call with a quiet, "We'll see." His gaze drifted across the garden to the woman who still wore his ring. Serafina. She stood in the late afternoon light, back straight, face blank. Her expression carried the chill of cathedral marble, elegant, distant, unreachable. She had always been this way. Untouchable. Divine. And for so long, he'd mistaken her detachment for purity, for grace, for something holy. He remembered the first time he tried to touch her, really touch her, as a husband should. She'd taken his hands gently, pressed them to his chest, and whispered, "Julian, I can't lose you. Your heart." So he took the pills. Religiously. Every night. For 7 years. Until last night. Last night, doubt crept in like a draft through a cracked window. He stared at the bottle in his palm, then quietly set it down. He didn't take it. For the first time, he wanted to know, really know, what lay on the other side of trust. That was when he heard it. The soft moans, muffled and irregular, barely audible through the walls. But unmistakably real. And they weren't hers alone. Serafina, his icy, untouchable wife, wasn't alone. Julian stood frozen in the hallway, every sound etching itself into his memory with excruciating clarity. The sharp intake of breath. The broken whispers. The intimacy that had never once been his. And then the voice. A man's voice. Familiar. Too familiar. Not just anyone. Her litter brother. Julian went cold all over. He didn't move, just barely shifted his eyes, and caught sight of what Serafina was holding in her hand. A photograph. Tristan's photograph. Her half-brother. Her lips were slightly parted, breath shallow, and her eyes, glazed with something deeper than lust. Something dangerously close to devotion. Julian turned away, every nerve frayed and screaming. He bit down on the flesh of his own hand, hard enough to draw blood, just to keep from making a sound. Time warped, stretched, collapsed. He didn't know how long he stood there, shivering in the dark like a man abandoned in a snowstorm. And then, he heard her voice. Soft, sultry, tangled in the tail end of a moan. Tristan. She whispered his name like a prayer. Something inside Julian shattered. Not cracked, shattered. Splintered beyond recognition. In that moment, alone in the hallway, he cried for the first time in years. The tears came silently but relentlessly, carving down his face in the dark. He never took her pills again after that night. And without the fog of medication, he began to hear more. Once. Then twice. Then countless times. The quiet gasps. The creaking floorboards. The name whispered like a secret lover's vow, again and again. Disappointment grew like mold in a locked room, slow, inevitable, toxic. It hardened into something else. Not rage. Not sorrow. Just numbness. A dull, ever-present ache that sat inside his chest like glass. And in that slow, silent agony, Julian finally understood. Serafina did have emotions. She did have desires. She just didn't have them for him. They were all reserved, for someone she could never truly have. Julian stared down at the white dress shirt in his hands, the one he'd bought on impulse, something playful, a little daring. He thought maybe, just maybe, tonight she'd let him touch her. That maybe after 7 years, she would finally reach for him. What a joke. But the cruel irony? This ridiculous marriage hadn't been his idea. He hadn't chased her down. Hadn't begged. In fact, the first time he saw Serafina was at a freshman orientation party. She wore a white dress, soft and flowing like a dream, and walked with the kind of poise that didn't belong to girls their age. She looked like she'd stepped off the page of some forgotten myth. Julian had been so entranced he didn't even hear Alex calling his name. When he finally snapped out of it, Alex laughed and shook his head. Seriously? You two? Don't waste your time, he warned. We went to the same high school. She didn't say a single word to a guy the entire 4 years. Not one. If a guy touched something she owned, she threw it away. People thought she might be into girls, but she doesn't even look at them either. I'm telling you, that woman is ice. Like Arctic-level cold. You really want to bleed yourself dry just to crash into an iceberg? Julian didn't respond. He only smiled. No one could have predicted what happened next. Out of the dozens, maybe hundreds, of men who courted her, Serafina chose Julian's letter. Not only read it. Answered it. And a month after graduation, she married him. It wasn't a wedding. Not really. There were no rings, no vows, no ceremony. Just a courthouse signature and her word that she didn't like noise or crowds. She didn't want a celebration. He accepted it. Because love makes you grateful for crumbs when you're starving. And then, almost immediately, came the diagnosis. A heart condition. Real. Dangerous. Limiting. From that day forward, every time he reached for her, she would gently pull back, those ice-blue eyes soft but unyielding. Your health matters more. When you're healed, then we'll talk. He believed her. Took his medicine. Waited. And waited. Nearly 7 years of waiting. And now, all he had left was a file folder full of clean test results and the realization that the only thing truly broken all these years, was his belief in her. Looking back now, it was laughable, how easily he had believed her. One sentence. That's all it took to convince him. One carefully placed lie, and he'd walked blindly into a 7-year illusion, arms open, heart exposed. The truth, raw and jagged, pummeled him from the inside. It wasn't that she didn't want intimacy. She just didn't want it with him. She needed a husband. A facade. Someone to play the role while her twisted affections for Tristan played out in the shadows. Julian didn't know how long he sat there, hollowed out and numb, staring at nothing. At some point, Serafina emerged from the bathroom, fresh and composed, her face blank as ever, cool, unreachable, untouched by the night's sins. As if nothing had happened. As if her betrayal was just a dream he'd invented. But for Julian, sleep never came. He lay beside her, wide-eyed in the dark, body aching with grief, when suddenly, she turned toward him. She pressed herself into his side, feverish to the touch. Her arms wrapped around him, her breath hot on his neck. Then her lips, soft, desperate, searched for his. Julian's heart stuttered. Hope surged like a pulse through dying veins. He pulled her close, their mouths just inches apart, and then he heard it. That name. Tristan. A single word. Whispered. Fragile. And fatal. It wasn't his name. It had never been. Julian froze. His blood turned cold, then boiled. He pushed himself out of bed and stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the sink with shaking hands. He stared into the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at him. Disheveled. Hollow-eyed. Broken. Julian. You were never a husband. Just a placeholder for someone else's fantasies. That one slip of her tongue crushed the last flicker of hope inside him. Reduced it to ash. He broke down, weeping, no longer quietly, no longer with restraint. This was grief in its most primal form. Guttural. Unfiltered. A sound pulled straight from the center of a soul imploding. The next morning, when Serafina woke up, Julian was already sitting on the couch, staring blankly out the window. His eyes were rimmed with red, voice hoarse. Tonight. He didn't even finish the sentence. She cut him off without flinching. Her voice, as always, smooth and cool. Your health still isn't stable. We shouldn't risk it. The words were light. Careless. But they hit him like a slap across the face. She wasn't protecting him. She was dismissing him. Reducing him to a needy, pathetic man obsessed with what she would never give. Julian looked down, swallowing the bitterness clawing up his throat. His voice was flat. Barely audible. Don't come home tonight. For the first time, Serafina blinked, just once. A flicker of surprise broke through her icy calm. You said, back when we got married, that I had to come home every night. Remember? Why the sudden change? And just like that, another knife to the gut. He winced, but kept his gaze low, began folding clothes into a suitcase with deliberate, mechanical care. Some of the things in this house are old, he said quietly. I'm getting rid of them. And in his mind, one of those things, was her. Serafina. The beautiful, silent storm he had once mistaken for love. Julian didn't pack much. He never had much to begin with. It took less than an hour to clear out his things. Then he left. His friends hadn't seen him in weeks, maybe longer. So when he showed up at the bar, freshly hollowed and silent, they welcomed him with open arms. One of them noticed his bare ring finger and let out a low whistle. So it's real this time? You finally done with her? Julian didn't answer right away. He just knocked back a full glass of whiskey and gave a single, wordless nod. They understood. No one pressed. They knew what kind of storm he'd been weathering, and tonight was about letting the weight fall off his shoulders, even for just a moment. The night buzzed around him, laughter and clinking glasses, but Julian remained in a fog. His phone kept lighting up with notifications, one after another. He heard every ping, felt each one like a tap on the shoulder, but didn't check. He was trying, for once, not to care. A girl at the table noticed the flush in his face and handed him a glass of water. Hey, drink this. You don't look so good. Julian reached for it, dazed. The room tilted. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out beneath him. The girl gasped and caught him before he hit the floor. And that's when he saw her. Serafina. Standing just a few feet away, framed in the club's dim, colored light like some vengeful specter. Her expression wasn't neutral this time, it was sharp, cold, and underneath that, something else. Jealousy. Resentment. I've been messaging you all night, she said, her voice clipped, brittle. You didn't see any of them? Julian blinked, disoriented. He glanced at the girl beside him, about to say something, maybe explain, maybe apologize, but Serafina didn't give him the chance. "Tristan's here. At this hotel. I need your help to find him." And just like that, the spell broke. Julian's throat closed up. He couldn't speak. Of course. She didn't come for him. She never came for him. She came for Tristan. Only then did Julian finally check his phone. The screen flooded with unread messages, but it wasn't hers that stopped him. It was a post. From Tristan. An Instagram update. Tristan had just gone public, with a girlfriend. Julian let out a dry, bitter laugh. So that was it. That was why Serafina was so upset. Not because he'd been with another woman. Not because she saw him nearly collapse. No, she didn't care. She was hurting because Tristan had moved on. He followed her without a word, through hotel hallways and up staircases, all the way to the second floor. It took 30 minutes before they found him, Tristan, drunk, slumped on a velvet bench, barely able to sit upright. Serafina's eyes turned glassy. She rushed to him, arms out, voice trembling with worry. "You drank too much," she murmured, clutching his shoulders. "You'll hurt yourself." "What were you thinking?" Julian stepped back. Just far enough to watch the scene unfold like an outsider. It was almost comical. He remembered the first time he had too much to drink. She didn't say a word. She let him stumble to bed alone. But now, seeing her fuss, seeing the panic in her eyes, he realized it wasn't that she didn't know how to care. She just never cared about him. Tristan groaned dramatically, loud and childish. "You took a whole minute to reply earlier." "1 whole minute. You never used to take that long." Serafina didn't respond. She just gripped his arm tighter, her face etched with panic, with something terrifyingly close to grief. "I was busy," she said softly. "I wasn't ignoring you. I swear." But Tristan wasn't done. He pushed again, his voice thick with slurred indignation, and tears. "Then why are your eyes red? Why do you look like you've been crying?" She looked down, her composure unraveling. And for a long moment, she said nothing. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her voice wavered. I. Julian watched from the shadows, arms folded across his chest. And in his mind, he finished her sentence for her. "Because I love you. Because you're my comfort, my weakness, the one I run to when everything else collapses. Because you have someone new now, and I can't stand it." Julian could almost hear her saying it. But he knew Serafina. Knew her too well. She would never allow herself to say those words out loud. Not even drunk. Not even broken. Emotion was a form of surrender she refused to give. Julian stood back, watching the two of them locked in their strange, codependent spiral. It was pathetic. Obsessive. And worst of all, boring. He had no place in this twisted performance. No interest in staying a moment longer. He turned to leave, just as Tristan suddenly looked up. His eyes, glassy from alcohol, sharpened like blades. There was something vicious in the way he stared at Julian, feral, unhinged. "I get it now," he spat, voice rising with hysteria. "It's you. You made her cry. You fucking did this." Julian barely had time to react. Tristan lunged. "You're the problem. You're her husband, and you hurt her." Julian stumbled back, shocked, trying to form words, but Tristan was already pushing him with full force, fists clenched and trembling with rage. "Go to hell. Don't you dare touch my sister. Don't even breathe near her." Julian's heel caught the edge of the hotel window frame. His arms flailed as gravity seized him. He grabbed for anything, curtains, a chair, the windowsill, but found nothing. Gasps erupted from the doorway. His friends had just arrived, too late to stop it. And then, Tristan shoved him again. Hard. The air ripped past his ears like a scream. The world flipped. And then. Impact. Blinding pain exploded through his skull, followed by a crushing, metallic crack in his chest. Blood flooded his throat, his lungs, his mind. And then, nothing. The pain was what woke him. A white-hot bolt across his chest, another in his gut, and a throbbing weight behind his eyes. Every breath stabbed like glass. Julian groaned. Someone rushed to his side. "Sir, don't move. You're not stable." He blinked. A ceiling. A hospital. Machines beeping. Cold fluid dripping into his veins. A doctor hovered over him. Calm, efficient. "You've broken 3 ribs, the doctor said. Your concussion's under observation. You're lucky to be alive." Julian tried to nod but winced. His voice came out hoarse. "Can I get some painkillers?" The doctor hesitated. Then sighed. "They're unavailable at the moment. Ms. Thorne took them." Julian blinked. "What?" "Your wife," the doctor clarified. "She insisted on giving them to her brother. We told her your condition was more severe, but she, well. She didn't listen." For the first time in his life, Julian felt rage deep enough to choke on. Serafina was a doctor. She knew better. She knew. He lay there, shaking, the pain flaring in his ribs like wildfire, but it was nothing compared to what was happening in his chest. She hadn't even left him the goddamn painkillers. That night, he reached for his phone, hands trembling. He found the number, tapped it, and waited. When Serafina's grandmother picked up, he didn't hold anything back. He told her everything. Every humiliating, twisted, agonizing detail, poured out like poison that had been fermenting in him for years. And this time, he wasn't going to stop until someone, anyone, finally heard him. It hadn't even been an hour since the call before Serafina showed up. She didn't knock. Didn't ask how he was. She walked into the hospital room with a cold frown and irritation in her voice. "You told Grandma that Tristan hit you?" Julian let out a short, bitter laugh. "What, that not true?" Serafina sat down across from him, her expression unreadable. Detached. Like a doctor consulting a difficult patient. Or worse, a stranger. "He's young," she said evenly. "Impulsive. You shouldn't take it so personally." Julian stared at her. "And besides," she added, almost as an afterthought, "he's injured too." That did it. Julian's smile faded, twisted into something darker. "Injured?" His voice was low, sharp. "Is that why he needed all my pain meds?" Serafina's tone shifted, just a touch. There was the faintest flicker of concern when she said, "His foot was hurting. He wouldn't stop crying." Julian blinked. For a second, he couldn't process it. Then the laugh returned, dry, humorless, scalding. He snapped. "Oh, so a sore foot counts as a medical emergency now? Tell me something, Serafina. What if I had died down there? What if I'd shattered my spine instead of 3 ribs? Would you still be sitting here justifying his tantrum with a damn footache?" She looked up at him, her beautiful face cast in shadows, and for the first time, there was irritation in her eyes. "This is a medical issue," she said curtly. "You're the one being dramatic. It's just a few broken ribs." Julian stared at her in disbelief. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of loyalty, patience, restraint. And this was who she really was? No remorse. No guilt. Not even basic human concern. He looked her dead in the eyes, desperate, one last time, to find something there. Anything. A flicker of worry. A trace of regret. Nothing. Only emptiness. Only contempt. Something inside him ruptured, quietly but completely. His voice dropped, rough and shaking. What am I to you, Serafina? A fool? A tool? A decoy for your goddamn forbidden obsession? He didn't say it aloud, but she felt it. She moved closer, sensing the shift. Her fingers brushed his hand, and for the first time, her tone softened. Don't be like this. You're my husband. My darling husband. Let it go, okay? She smiled, the way one might smile at a child throwing a tantrum. Tell you what, she said. Pick something you like. I'll buy it for you. My treat. Then, like it took everything in her not to choke on the offer, she added with a glance away. When you're better. I'll even use my hand. Just once. Julian felt his breath catch. She said it so casually. Like she was giving him a favor. Like it was a gift. Was that what he'd become? Some desperate, pitiful man who should be grateful for a hand job? His heart turned to ice. He smiled. Not kindly. Don't bother, he said, voice dry as dust. Save it for your brother. Serafina blinked. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond. She just stared at him, searching for meaning in his words. Then, with a slight purse of her lips, she turned and walked out. No apology. No questions. Just silence. Julian leaned back against the pillows, pain searing through his side, but it barely registered anymore. Because now, the pain inside him was worse than anything broken ribs could do. And for the first time since this all began, he didn't just feel abandoned. He felt free. She didn't visit him. Not once. For 15 days, Serafina never stepped foot in the hospital. And Julian, he took that silence as permission. As closure. He filed for his Swiss visa. Quietly. Methodically. And the moment it was approved, the moment that stamp hit the paper, he exhaled. For the first time in years, he could breathe. This is what freedom feels like. Back home, life carried on, at least on the surface. Serafina returned each evening as if nothing had changed. She prepared breakfast, the way a wife might for a man she cared about. She'd even bring him coffee late at night, just like old times, slipping it onto the desk while he worked, murmuring something soft. To anyone else, it might have looked like love. Or maybe guilt. And maybe that's what it was, an apology in the only form she could offer. If it had been the Julian of years ago, he might have cried. Might have let the kindness chip away at his resentment. But not now. Now it all felt like a farce. Because as she made him eggs in the kitchen, she was on the phone, her voice low, sweet, her smile unmistakable. Talking to Tristan. Because when she added honey to his coffee, she giggled. That's how Tristan likes it. Every act of care carried the echo of someone else. Julian could feel it, jealousy and despair wrapping around his ribcage like ivy. Tight. Suffocating. His chest ached, not from injury, but from something deeper. That 7-year devotion? Gone. Like smoke in the wind. He clenched his jaw. Let it crack. And in that silent resolve, he realized. Letting go only takes a second. So he did. He moved out. Packed what little he still called his own and relocated to his work studio. For 2 full weeks, he buried himself in edits, drafts, deadlines, anything that kept his mind from wandering back to her. And then, he had to go back. A few research documents he'd forgotten were still in the house. Just one trip, he told himself. In and out. But the second he opened the front door, he froze. Right there, in the living room, was Tristan. Shirtless. No, completely bare, save for a thin pair of briefs. He lay sprawled across the leather couch, like he owned the place, lounging with the laziness of someone who knew they wouldn't be questioned. And beside him, Serafina. Gone was the glacial mask. Gone was the distance. In its place, warmth. Tenderness. She sat at his side, gently cupping his chin, helping him swallow a pill. Julian's hand clenched around the doorknob, knuckles white, the sting in his ribs returning like a scream. Tristan noticed him first. The look on his face was unmistakable, smug. Triumphant. "Oops," he said, stretching like a cat. "Guess I should have locked the door. But hey, I wasn't feeling well. Sis said I needed to rest, so she offered to take care of me herself." He grinned, eyes glittering with cruelty. "You don't mind, do you?" Julian wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or vomit. What kind of injury required a grown man to be half-naked, getting hand-fed meds by his married sister? He turned to Serafina, hoping, still, somehow, that she'd say something. Anything. But she didn't even look at him. Instead, she placed a hand on Tristan's shoulder and whispered, "Don't talk too much. You'll aggravate the injury." Tristan huffed in exaggerated pain, then leaned back, practically glowing with satisfaction, as if he were the husband. As if this were his home. Julian felt the bitterness rise like bile. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of restraint. And the most she'd ever done for him, was bring him a cup of coffee. He turned away. Head down. Shoulders stiff. He climbed the stairs one step at a time, forcing himself not to look back. Not to look at her. Not to see the softness in her voice or the way her hand lingered on Tristan's skin. He tried to ignore it. Tried to forget her gentleness. Tried to erase the image of her caring. Because the truth was clear. She had warmth. Just never for him. His body was packed and ready to leave, but his heart. His heart felt like someone had gouged it open with a spoon. A raw, gaping wound bleeding shame into every cell of his body. The pain wasn't sharp, it was loud. Loud in the way despair is when it tells you, over and over again, you were never enough. He reached for the door. And that's when Serafina called out. "Wait." Julian turned, surprised by the sound of her voice. Tristan stood behind her, his expression sour, gaze lowered to the floor. He mumbled something, barely louder than a mosquito's buzz. "Sorry." Julian blinked. Serafina lifted her eyes and gave Tristan a slight look, prompting him to say it again. This time, more audible. "I'm sorry. I overreacted. That night. I shouldn't have." Julian said nothing. Serafina's voice softened, barely, but her face remained blank. "Stay tonight. You're never home. It's hard to explain things to Grandma." Julian hesitated. Outside, dark clouds rolled across the sky like a warning. Thunder growled in the distance. He should have said no. He didn't. That night, as he sat on the edge of the bed, Serafina slipped into the room, wearing little more than silence and the scent of iris and warm skin. She curled into him. Her lips found his. Her breath hot, needy. Her voice a sultry murmur. "Julian." His body reacted before his brain could. Instinct. Memory. Muscle. But he stopped himself. His hands clenched. His breath hitched. No. Not like this. But she didn't stop. She pressed closer. Her skin feverish, her touch urgent. Something felt off. He reached over, flicked on the light, and froze. Her pupils were dilated. Her eyes unfocused. Her cheeks flushed, her breath erratic. But not with desire. With something else. "Serafina," he said, voice sharp. "What the hell did you take?" His eyes flicked to the table. There, beside his laptop, was the half-empty bottle of that spiked liquor his friends had gifted him as a joke. Strong. Laced. Absolutely not something anyone should be drinking alone. And suddenly, it all made sense. Julian stood there, motionless, staring at the woman wrapped around him. A woman whose body was burning up with artificial need. A woman who couldn't even look him in the eye unless her bloodstream was drugged. It wasn't passion. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was chemistry. Induced. And for what? Because she couldn't face him sober? Because she had to force herself to want him? He felt sick. What kind of man needed substances just to be desired by his own wife? What kind of marriage had he been convincing himself to hold on to? Tears burned behind his eyes, but this time, he didn't let them fall. Instead, he walked out of the room, heart hollow, pulse flat. Tristan was standing in the hallway. Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "Go," he rasped, voice raw. "She needs you." Tristan stumbled, caught off guard. "What?" Julian's eyes were bloodshot, empty. "Go in there. She wants you." Tristan started to argue, but then he caught a glimpse inside. Serafina, sprawled across the bed, barely dressed, hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes unfocused and shining with heat. It hit him like a fist. His mouth opened. Closed. His hands clenched at his sides. "Serafina, are you okay?" His voice cracked, hesitant now, laced with disbelief. She blinked up at him, disoriented. Her eyes darted past him, landed on Julian. Her gaze, foggy and warm, tried to focus. She looked like she was about to say something, maybe even apologize, maybe stop this madness, but then she reached out blindly. Her hand brushed against Tristan's chest. And her body collapsed into his. Like instinct. Like gravity. Like betrayal, in its most intimate form. The word "sister" left Tristan's mouth like a match to gasoline. In that moment, Serafina shattered. As their lips met, the wall she had spent her entire life building collapsed into ruin. There was no restraint. No cold detachment. No self-control. Only hunger. Only her. Only him. She kissed Tristan like she'd been starving for years, as if all the feelings she'd never dared speak could finally spill out without shame. Her hands tangled in his hair. Her breath hitched with desperation. It was the first time Julian had ever seen desire on her face. And it didn't belong to him. He closed the door. Behind him, muffled gasps and quiet, broken moans seeped through the walls like poison. Each sound landed like a blade across his chest, cutting him deeper and deeper. He stood there, fists clenched, reliving it all. The night they both drank the same aphrodisiac, she'd spent the entire evening submerged in ice water, refusing to even look at him. The time they were stranded on a freezing mountainside, she hugged herself to sleep beside a snowbank, rather than accept his warmth. The moment they visited her grandmother, she let herself be scolded like a child before she would pretend to hold his hand. And now? One word from him, one "sister" from Tristan's lips, and she crumbled. Julian felt as if he were drowning in ice water. For the first time, he saw her love clearly. And it was blazing, just never for him. He didn't know how long he sat in the living room. The sun rose. The house grew quiet again. And he sat there, still, silent, while everything inside him burned to ash. The next morning, at the table, he forced himself to chew the toast. It tasted like sawdust. Today was supposed to be important. His latest novel was launching, and he had a live stream scheduled with his publisher and readers. But he felt nothing. Just as he stood to leave, Serafina's voice stopped him. "Wait." He turned. She walked toward him, calm as ever, and leaned in to brush a kiss against the corner of his mouth. "Be careful out there." Julian flinched as though she'd slapped him. A kiss? Now? What was this, his reward for being silent about what she did last night? He let out a bitter laugh. His skin crawled. She made his mouth feel dirty. He didn't say a word. Just left. Only when he returned to his studio did the numbness begin to fade. He buried himself in tasks, in outlines and emails, forcing his thoughts away from last night's image, her, tangled in the arms of her brother. By the time the live stream began, he had almost convinced himself he could push through. But within 5 minutes, it exploded. Comment after comment flooded the screen. "This guy's a homewrecker. He seduced someone's wife and dumped his own. He's just using women to climb the ladder." The chat spiraled into chaos. What should have been a peaceful book launch turned into a public inquisition. Julian's face went stone cold. He ended the stream, blocked dozens of accounts, and ran the IP trace. The result? Tristan. Of course. Julian didn't hesitate. He collected every screenshot, timestamp, and server log and sent them straight to the press. This time, he wouldn't be silent. This time, he'd expose everything. He set up a follow-up livestream with media present, prepped, ready, with backup evidence. But just as the first set of files was uploaded to the internet, they disappeared. Deleted. Erased. Moments later, chaos erupted at the media venue. Tristan had barged in, backed by a group of friends, smug and brazen. He stormed the press event like a tabloid tornado, slamming photos down in front of everyone. Photos of Julian, with a woman he'd never met. In bed. Intimate. False. Fabricated. The flashbulbs went off. The cameras rolled. And just like that, Julian became the villain in his own story. "Julian. How dare you smear me like that? You're nothing, nothing." The voice cut through the air like glass. Julian barely had time to react before he remembered, the cameras were still rolling. They were live. He turned to the screen, breath shaky, voice controlled but urgent. "These images, they're fake. Doctored. I never cheated." But it was already too late. The media, sensing blood in the water, lunged like sharks. And Tristan? He didn't come alone. Within seconds, the room descended into chaos. Tristan's entourage surged forward, knocking over lights, equipment, chairs, shattering the fragile order of the livestream. Julian saw it coming and made a move to retreat, but with a sharp nod from Tristan, the crowd turned violent. Someone shoved him. Hard. He hit the ground with a groan, the pain slicing through his side like a knife. Before he could stand, Tristan yanked him up by the hair, forcing him to meet his gaze. His eyes, boiling with jealousy, with madness, burned through him. "You still want to fight back?" he hissed. "You think I don't know who posted that evidence? It was you, wasn't it?" Julian stayed silent. Tristan leaned in, lips curled into a sneer. "Well, it doesn't matter. Because I said you're the cheater. And when I say it, everyone believes it." He shoved Julian back, and without another word, his followers pounced. A punch landed square in Julian's stomach. He doubled over, coughed blood onto the floor, his vision swimming as the crowd circled like wolves. He clenched his teeth, digging through the pain, his voice low and furious. "You think Serafina will let you get away with this?" That made Tristan laugh, high and wild, with something sick and sharp beneath it. "Serafina? You still don't get it, do you? His voice dropped to a mocking whisper. How do you think I knew you were streaming? Who do you think helped me erase the files? Julian's heart stopped. The air left his lungs. No. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. But he knew. Deep down, he already knew. Before he could say a word, Tristan snapped his fingers. Don't just stand there. Beat the shit out of him. They obeyed without hesitation. Julian's body became the center of fists and feet, blows raining down with merciless rhythm. He lost track of where it hurt most, his ribs, his face, his lungs, all screaming at once. The edges of the world blurred. Darkness teased the corners of his vision. He tried to go under, to let it take him. But Tristan didn't let him. Wake up, he snarled, grabbing Julian by the collar, shaking him. I'm not done. He kicked him hard in the side, then stepped forward and stomped on his wrist. Julian screamed. Pain shot through him like fire-licking bone. He twisted on the floor, curling around his arm, clutching what was left of his strength. This hand? Tristan said, stepping harder, voice drenched in venom. This is your famous hand, right? Julian gasped, panic overriding pain. This is the hand that built your name. The one that wrote your novels. That made you matter. And then, he did it. One finger. Crack. 2. 3. Julian fought like a dying animal, but they held him down, arms pinned, legs locked. 4. 5. Then 6, 7, 8. Tristan's face was a portrait of sadistic glee. You're nothing without this. Julian screamed again as the 9th and 10th fingers broke, each pop like a gunshot to the soul. His writing hand, destroyed. But what hurt more, what truly gutted him, wasn't the physical agony. It was the knowledge. The truth. That Serafina let this happen. Because none of it would have been possible, none, without her silence, her betrayal, her willful absence. And as his vision dimmed, as his body finally gave in to the blackness, he looked up, one final time. And saw her. Serafina. Rushing into the room, too late, her face pale with shock, her voice rising above the noise. And Tristan? Grinning. Like a boy who'd won the game. When Julian came to, he was back in a hospital bed. The sterile white ceiling blurred above him, and his body ached in places he didn't know could hurt. His hands, wrapped in thick white gauze, felt like dead weight. A doctor stood at his side, shaking his head in disbelief. You must have made an enemy out of someone, he muttered. They wanted to ruin you. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at his hands, no, the bandages where his hands used to be. Useless now. Crushed. Broken. Across the room, Serafina sat, calm as ever. This whole thing, she said evenly, let's not make it bigger than it is. You weren't exactly innocent either. Julian turned his head, slowly, as if even that took effort. He laughed. It was hollow. Hoarse. It tore at his throat. What did I do wrong, Serafina? She shifted slightly, the faintest twinge of guilt flickering in her eyes. Tristan lost control. He didn't mean to go that far. He's not a bad person. She trailed off, knowing how absurd she sounded. He cried, she added, softer. When he saw all the blood, his eyes were so swollen. He didn't sleep all night. Julian's eyes locked onto hers. And what about my fingers, he asked, voice a whisper soaked in acid. All 10 of them. Broken. That just gets brushed aside. Serafina's expression barely shifted. If anything, it turned cold. Dismissive. Tristan knows he made a mistake. He recorded an apology for you. That's not something he does often. Julian blinked, then let out a low, incredulous laugh. He laughed until it hurt. He laughed until he couldn't breathe. I must have been out of my mind to ever love you. Then his voice turned to steel. We're getting divorced. Serafina opened her mouth, but then stopped. Something in his eyes, bloodshot, blazing with fury, warned her not to speak. Fuck off, he snarled. Just go. She hesitated only a second before turning and walking out of the room without a word. And the moment the door clicked shut, Julian collapsed. His body, too broken to hold him up anymore, slid from the bed. As darkness overtook him again, a single tear slipped from his eye. The last tear he would ever shed for Serafina. It was another 2 weeks before he was discharged. When Julian returned home, the sky was gray, the air heavy. Serafina had heard he was coming. So she cooked. An entire table of food, delicate, artful, overdone. She set it all out with care, waiting quietly. Julian stepped through the door. Took one look. Then turned away. Without a word, he walked straight upstairs. Serafina stood frozen in the dining room, the dishes steaming behind her. She followed him up. And there he was, in the bedroom, packing. Everything. Clean, methodical, silent. She felt something twist in her chest. Where are you going? He didn't answer. Instead, he held out a small silver ring, worn, scuffed, nothing special. Except she knew it was. That ring had been his idea, back when they first got together. He'd insisted on it. Said he wanted something simple, something meaningful. He wore it every day. Even in the shower. It had never left his hand. Until now. Now, he held it like it was a piece of trash. Serafina reached for it, but he let it drop into her palm without a second glance. Then he picked up his bag and walked out. His face, stone. His eyes, dead. And for the first time, Serafina didn't try to stop him. Because deep down, she knew. She had nothing left to say. Tristan had opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He hadn't expected things to go this far. His grip tightened around Serafina's arm, nerves rattling beneath his skin. They're really getting divorced? He asked, voice trembling. Serafina watched Julian's back disappear down the hall. Her chest rose and fell, once. She shook her head. No. He won't go through with it. He still loves me. But Julian heard her. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. His steps didn't falter. This time, he meant it. He crashed with his friend Carl in Los Angeles. The house was quiet, the air clean, the people around him real. Carl poured him a drink, sat down across from him, and asked gently, "So what's next?" Julian glanced down at his hands, still wrapped, still healing. Fingers he couldn't even lift a coffee mug with. The nerve damage might be permanent. He let out a breath and smiled, small but sure. Divorce. Then I'm moving to Sweden. The others nodded in solemn support. They knew everything. They had stood by him during the worst of it. That night was the first he tried to sleep without nightmares. But peace didn't last. After walking Carl to his car, Julian turned back toward the house, and felt something slam against the back of his skull. Hard. Everything went dark. He woke up under golden light, but it wasn't warm. It was sickly. Artificial. A stage. Velvet-lined. Gilded railings. Thick metal chains wrapped around his wrists, biting into the skin. Around him, dozens of others, men, women, chained like animals, dazed and frightened. Panic spread like a virus. Tristan, on the far end of the stage, bolted upright and lunged toward the bars. He slammed his fists against them, wild-eyed. Help! Help me. What is this place? He was answered by a masked man in black, who drove an electric baton into his ribs. Tristan screamed, collapsing to the floor. Suddenly, a massive screen flickered to life above them. Faces appeared, terrified family members, partners, lovers, screaming, crying, searching. And among them, Serafina. Julian's breath caught. It all became clear. They had been abducted by one of the dark web's most notorious death games, a psychological torture ring run through underground auctions. The rules were brutal. Only one loved one could be chosen for rescue. The other? Executed on the spot. No exceptions. Julian watched the screen with terrifying calm. He didn't even blink. Because deep down, he already knew. There was no choice to be made. Not for her. For Serafina, the answer had always been Tristan. It had always been Tristan. But then, he looked around. Blood on the floor. Screams echoing off the walls. One after another, captives were being dragged off stage. People hesitated. Families panicked. Choices were made. Others, left to die. The terror was real. Primal. Raw. And even Julian, resolved as he was, felt the cold hands of fear close around his throat. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be silent. But his body remembered pain. Remembered broken fingers and crushed pride. Remembered Serafina's lips pressed against Tristan's collarbone. He swallowed hard. And then, the screen zoomed in on her. Serafina. Her face wasn't cold now. It was frantic. Shaking. Her eyes darted between two panels. On the left, Tristan, sobbing uncontrollably, begging. On the right, Julian. Silent. Still. Watching her. It was the first time he had ever seen her like this. Panicked. Uncomposed. Stripped bare of her defenses. A woman being asked to choose between the man who adored her blindly, and the one she had destroyed with her own hands. Julian didn't speak. He just looked at her. And in that look was everything. Do it, his eyes seemed to say. Finish it. Because if she didn't choose him now, here, at the edge of death, she never had. And she never would. Serafina stared at the masked man, panic rising in her throat. She tried to reason, tried to bargain. Can't I save them both? She asked, voice trembling. The masked man gave a sharp, cold laugh. No. He raised his weapon toward another captive and fired, no warning, no delay. Blood sprayed across the floor. You have 60 seconds. Choose one. His voice echoed through the chamber like a countdown from hell. If you don't, both die. 50 seconds. Serafina stood frozen. 40 seconds. Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted between the two screens. Tristan, sobbing. Julian, silent. 30 seconds. She turned to Julian, voice shaking. I'll get Tristan out first, then I'll come back for you. If you die, I'll go with you. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she said it anyway. And then, 10 seconds. Without pause, without hesitation, she pointed to the left. Tristan. Julian smiled. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't kind. It was empty. There was no pain left to feel. How many times could the same wound be reopened before you just stopped bleeding? Go with me if I die. What a joke. He lifted his head and stared into the camera, his voice as calm as it had ever been. Serafina, he said quietly, I only have one wish in the next life. That I never meet you again. Serafina froze. Her breath caught. Her hands stopped moving. Even as Tristan was pulled off the platform, even as people around her screamed and called and begged, she couldn't move. His words had cut her more deeply than any gunshot ever could. The gun was raised. A loud bang echoed. The screen went black. Except, Julian didn't die. The bullet never came. His chains were released. 2 guards escorted him silently down a corridor, away from the cameras, away from the death. And into a private room bathed in soft amber light. A girl stood waiting for him. She was young. Barely 20. Sharp eyes. A wicked smile. "You're interesting," she said, as if she'd just discovered a new toy. "Want to make a deal?" 1 week later. Julian returned to his old home. The girl, his new patron, had explained everything. She'd bought him. Rescued him. On paper, he was hers now, for 3 years. A contract. A deal. He didn't ask for details. He didn't care anymore. But before he left the country, he needed something: his ID, his personal files, old manuscripts. When he walked through the door, the smell of the house hit him like a ghost. And then, laughter. He turned the corner and saw Tristan, alive and well, lounging on the couch, flipping through one of his old notebooks. His manuscripts. His life's work. Serafina stepped out of the kitchen, visibly startled but not regretful. "Julian," she said, almost relieved. "You're back." He didn't answer. His eyes never left the pages in Tristan's hand. She followed his gaze, then offered a casual explanation. "We figured, since you were probably dead, we'd let Tristan use the material for his graduation thesis." Julian just stood there. Staring. Breathing. Not speaking. His voice, when it finally came, was a whisper. "I'm sorry, what?" Serafina blinked, confused. "He's using your work. For school. You weren't here, and he needed." He didn't hear the rest. He couldn't. All those nights. All those pages. Years of pain and discipline and love poured into every word. And she gave it away. Like it meant nothing. And worst of all, she never even looked for him. Not once. Julian could no longer contain himself. He lowered his head and let out a hollow laugh, quiet, sharp, shaking with fury. "Do you even have a heart?" he said, voice cutting like ice. "Or did you let a dog eat it? You're digging through a dead man's work. You think that's okay?" Serafina stiffened. She realized, too late, that this wasn't just anger, it was rage. Real, and dangerous. She stepped forward quickly, reaching for his wrist with force. "Don't be like this," she said hastily. "It doesn't have to be this way. We can start over. We can have a good life." But Julian flinched from her touch like it burned. He ripped his arm away, eyes colder than winter air. "I don't want it," he said, flatly. "You know what? With him, everything's right. With me, everything's wrong. Isn't that how it's always been? You've been rotten to me for years. I just didn't want to admit it." His voice cracked, but it only made him speak louder. His eyes, red with a fury she'd never seen. Serafina stood frozen. This wasn't the Julian she remembered. The quiet, patient, soft-spoken man who forgave everything, even when it destroyed him. This man was someone else. He bit his lower lip hard, so hard it almost bled. "You think I kept loving you, so you took advantage of it," he growled. "You thought I'd never leave. You thought you could do anything, and I'd just stay. Well, guess what? I'm done. I don't love you anymore." His voice echoed. Cold. Final. "We're strangers now. Not a scent. Not a word. Not a single connection left. Serafina parted her lips to speak, but when she saw the tears streaking down his face, something inside her unraveled. For the first time, she looked unmoored. Lost. "Julian, don't be impulsive," she said, voice uncertain. "Let Tristan get married first. Once things settle, I promise, I'll come back. We'll live together again. I mean it." But Julian was already gone. Not physically. But soul deep, he had vanished. The UK visa finally came through. Julian was leaving. He said his goodbyes to his brothers, gave firm hugs and half-hearted smiles, and promised to stay in touch. Then, just one thing left to do. One final stop. He returned to the house for the last time. The sky outside was overcast, casting a dull gray light over everything. The house was silent. Lifeless. Cold. Perfect. He moved quickly, no hesitation, no detours. Just grabbed the essentials, made a quick sweep of the rooms, then went upstairs to rest. His body was still healing. He needed sleep. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, he'd be free. He showered fast, packed everything to the last item, and lay on the bed for what would be his final night in this place. No dreams. No tossing. Just quiet. When he opened his eyes again, the clock read 10:03 a.m. The flight wasn't until late afternoon. He sat up. No heaviness. No regret. Today, he would walk away from everything. He dressed, zipped up his bags, and grabbed his passport. Just as he turned to leave, a gust of wind from the open window knocked something off the table. It hit the floor with a small clatter, right near his foot. He glanced down. And froze. He bent down and picked it up. It was the Street Christopher medal. The same one he had given Serafina when they first got together. He remembered it vividly, how he'd climbed those ancient, rain-slicked steps to the old church on the hill, shivering beneath his soaked coat. How he'd begged the priest for a blessing. How he'd prayed with trembling hands. And when he finally placed the medallion in her palm, she had looked up at him with eyes that almost glimmered. For a second, he thought he saw the ice melt. She watched, silent and reverent, as he straightened the chain and fastened it gently around her neck. "I ask Saint Christopher to protect Serafina," he had said, voice low. "May she always be safe. May her every wish come true." And for years, he believed that moment meant something. Until he found out the truth. She hadn't cried because of him. She hadn't softened because of the gesture. Tristan had a fever that week. And her tears, that flicker of warmth, weren't for Julian at all. The medal he had nearly given his life to find, had been no more than a charm she used to comfort Tristan. Now, it lay on the floor like trash. Just like his love. Just like everything he'd given her. Julian laughed under his breath. Quiet, bitter, broken. He reached for the marriage certificate in his bag, pulled out his phone, and opened a message thread he should have burned long ago. "Julian. I need to tell you something important. Can you come home? I'll be waiting." The reply came faster than he expected. "Serafina. Okay. I'll be there soon. Wait for me." He leaned back into the couch, exhaled slowly. For once, he thought maybe, just maybe, she would show up. No interference. No excuses. Time passed. An hour. 2. 3. His phone buzzed with boarding reminders, gate changes, final notices. Still, no Serafina. Then, he opened Instagram. And there it was. A new post from Tristan. "Stomach's acting up again. So thankful Serafina cancelled all her work to be here with me." Julian didn't even blink. His phone rang seconds later. "Serafina." He answered. Her voice came through, soft, rehearsed. Julian. I'm sorry. Tristan's not feeling well. I stayed to take care of him. She hesitated. I'll come home tonight, I promise. Just wait for me. I'll make it up to you. She hung up. Julian stared at the blank screen for a long, long time. Then he laughed. A real laugh. Not angry. Not bitter. Just, done. He stood, lifted his suitcase, and paused only once, to toss the St. Christopher medallion onto the floor. Then, he opened his phone one last time and typed. Serafina, from this year forward, in this life, may we never meet again. He sent it. Then deleted everything, her number, her photos, her messages, her memory. He walked to the door. Opened it. Stepped into the light. And never looked back. Serafina didn't realize Julian was gone until 7 days later. 7 days. In that time, she had been commuting between the house and the hospital, tending to Tristan, fielding work calls, organizing appointments, never once noticing that the house had grown quieter. But habit is a strange thing. It clings, even when people don't. It started with the small things. The hot water was never ready when she returned home. The painkillers she usually found neatly placed on the dining table were gone. And at night, when she slipped into bed, the faint scent of peppermint was missing. That subtle trace of Julian she had grown used to, had vanished. Her body began to ache. Her head throbbed. Her mood turned brittle. Frustrated, she opened her message thread with Julian. It was the same as always, full of his words. His warmth. His efforts to keep them connected. Photos of funny-shaped clouds. A meme of a sleepy kitten. A short text saying, I saw a cafe today that reminded me of you. But now? Now, the chat was empty. Silent. All that remained was his final message. Serafina, from this year forward, in this life, may we never meet again. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to text him. Ask, where are you? Why haven't you come home? Why haven't you checked in? But before she could hit send, another message popped up. From Tristan. Again. And so, once more, she put Julian aside. Until the day she ran into Julian's friends. They were gathered outside a coffee shop, laughing loudly, until they saw her. Then the silence dropped like a curtain. She took one tentative step forward. I was just wondering if. But she never finished the sentence. Carl stepped forward. His expression was pure disgust. You've got some nerve showing your face. Serafina flinched. I don't understand what I. You don't understand, another friend snapped. Let us help you. And one by one, they began to speak. To spill. The things Julian never told her. The things he had quietly buried behind his patience, behind his silence. Remember when you said you needed to focus on grad school? Julian worked overnight shifts, entered competitions, finished entire projects alone, just to make sure your name was on every single award. He let people think you did the work. Your birthday. The gemstone necklace you said you wanted? He didn't have the money. So he worked. Double shifts. Design jobs. 3 weeks straight. Bought it with his own blood. But you didn't even invite him to the party. He sat outside your place. In the rain. All night. He got a fever. You never called. Never checked. After the wedding, you said you liked light meals. He tried. Cooked every night. Did you ever taste a single thing he made? You stand here asking us where he is? You, who lived with him for 7 years. Carl's voice was shaking now. You don't get to ask where he is. You don't get to miss him. Julian used to write. God, he used to write. Did you know he was a prodigy? Do you know how many awards he won? But after he met you, he stopped. He gave it all up. For you. One of them stepped closer. Is your heart made of stone, Seraphina? Because Julian, he gave you every piece of his blood and his soul. And you still stayed cold. For the first time, Seraphina said nothing. Silence curled around her like fog, thick and suffocating. Because every single story they told, every accusation, they were true. She remembered. Each moment they hurled at her like a weapon was etched somewhere deep in her memory, hazy but never gone. And suddenly, they sharpened. Came back in full color. She had grown so used to Julian's presence, like breath, like gravity. She had thought he was naive. Too soft. Too much. A fool. Because she was the kind of woman who never said love. Who never gave more than she received. Who always made sure she was the one holding the umbrella. And yet, Julian never once complained. He just smiled. Because I love you. She remembered him saying that. Soft. Simple. No strings attached. And now, that voice echoed. Because I love you. She whispered it aloud. Like a line from a language she never learned to speak. And then the memories flooded in. She saw him at 18, standing in the wind with that crooked, gentle smile, eyes lit with nothing but tenderness. It's okay. As long as you turn around. I'll be right here. She saw him at 20, grinning so hard his face practically split, holding up a cheap silver ring like it was a diamond crown. You see this? Our first couple ring. Mine and Seraphina's. She saw him at 22, carrying barely more than a backpack as he stepped over the threshold of her home. His gaze met hers, clear, steady, full of light. If you don't want to get married, we'll just keep dating. If you don't want it public, we'll stay underground. If you don't want a wedding, we'll just live. No pressure. No demands. Just presence. Then came 26. She saw the Julian who had nothing left. His eyes dry. His voice dead. Seraphina, let's get divorced. That was the last version of him she saw. And maybe the most honest. The air around her began to shift. She turned the steering wheel with muscle memory, her mind nowhere near the road. She saw the spaces he used to fill. The kitchen, no sound of clanging pans, no familiar hum of him singing badly off-key. No one saying, you work hard. Let me take care of the rest. No one cleaning the messes before she saw them. No one bringing her medicine with a smile that asked for nothing in return. She remembered waking up half-drunk once, he'd kissed the corner of her mouth, thinking she was asleep. When she didn't push him away, he'd smiled all day. She remembered how every night, he'd wait for her to come home. Sometimes, he didn't even say anything. Just sat there, eyes lit up like a kid seeing fireworks. Then, with that soft, ever-hopeful voice. Seraphina, can you hug me? And now. Now it was all gone. A silence so total it was deafening. She blinked. Her hands were on the wheel. But her eyes were wet. Julian's friends were gone. They hadn't looked back. One of them had delivered the final blow. Whatever you're thinking, Julian doesn't want you anymore. She didn't respond. Not then. But as she drove, her vision blurred. Everything looked too bright. Too far. Too wrong. She didn't see the red light. She didn't see the car speeding through the intersection. She didn't even flinch. A blaring horn. Screeching tires. Impact. Metal crushed like paper. Glass exploded in 1,000 directions. And Seraphina, who never cried, never paused, never looked back. Was gone in the blink of an eye. The crash wasn't fatal. Just loud. Violent enough to jolt Serafina back into her body. She stumbled out of the car in a daze, headlights glaring behind her, someone shouting from a nearby vehicle, but none of it registered. All she could hear was that one sentence. "Julian doesn't want you anymore." It echoed over and over, louder than sirens. Louder than guilt. Serafina shook her head, as if denying the very ground beneath her. No. No, that wasn't true. She had never been good at explaining what Julian meant to her, never good at putting words to things she didn't fully understand. After all, in her world, there were only ever two people, Tristan and herself. Everyone else? Extras. She'd always assumed Julian was just another extra. A body in the background. A tool. A placeholder. He wasn't even a friend, not really. She married him not out of love, but convenience. He'd been the one who stayed. The one who didn't leave when everyone else did. So she kept him, like a piece of furniture. Something familiar. Something useful. But now he was gone. And suddenly, the house was wrong. She imagined coming home to darkness. No light left on in the hallway. No one waiting on the couch, half asleep, stubbornly blinking against the pull of dreams just to see her come through the door. She imagined eating alone. Waking up to silence. No one remembering her favorite foods, her allergies, her moods. No one lighting up just because she smiled. And it hit her like a second crash. She couldn't bear it. She couldn't lose that. Her heels scraped the pavement as she broke into a run, leaving the police, the crash, the noise behind her. The only thing she could think of was Julian. Julian's voice, Julian's eyes, Julian's quiet, clumsy affection. The way he always nagged her to wear an extra sweater. The way he'd slip painkillers into her bag when her cramps were bad. The way he'd plead with her to eat just one more bite because she was too thin. And most of all, his tears. His voice, trembling and raw. "Why did I ever fall in love with you?" That sentence pierced her like a blade. It landed in the pit of her stomach and twisted. She collapsed on the pavement just outside her house, clutching her chest like she could dig the pain out with her bare hands. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't believe how badly she had failed him. And how completely she regretted it. When she finally reached home, hope flickered through her like the strike of a match. The light was on. Someone was home. Her heart surged. She threw the door open. Julian? But it wasn't Julian. It was Tristan. Sitting in the living room, controller in hand, mashing buttons, eyes glued to the TV. He didn't even look up. The rest of the apartment was still. Too still. No scent of mint. No steaming bowl of soup. No scattered notebooks filled with Julian's handwriting. No slippers by the door. No warmth in the air. Just one light. And a stranger. Because now, Tristan felt like a stranger too. Julian was nowhere. And somehow, that made everything feel like nowhere. She ran upstairs in a panic. It wasn't until now that she finally understood what had been missing all along. Not something vague. Not just a feeling. Julian. She was missing Julian. His half-finished manuscripts, scattered like fallen leaves across their shared desk, each page etched with his name, his ideas, his quiet ambition. Gone. His cookbook, too. The one he wrote from scratch for her. Tailored to her taste. No onions, no garlic, light on the oil. He'd called it, Meals for Sarah. Gone. And his clothes, his tiny share of the closet that never grew. While she rotated new outfits every season, Julian had barely a handful of shirts. Most of their money went toward groceries, rent, and her. He'd scrimped just to buy her birthday gifts, to make her feel adored, even if he never got anything for himself. Now the closet felt too full. Too silent. She forced herself to stay calm and picked up her phone, dialing his number. "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the tone." She hung up. Dialed again. And again. And again. Her fingers moved on instinct, like muscle memory, refusing to believe what her brain already knew. She switched to text, typing with trembling thumbs, just something simple. "Call me when you see this." Send. Error. Message blocked by recipient. A sharp twist lodged deep in her chest. Still, she whispered to herself like a prayer. He's just mad. Julian's gotten mad before. He always comes back. She could almost hear him already. That soft voice, guilt in his eyes, head tilted like a kicked puppy. "I'm sorry. I'm not mad anymore. Can we go home?" She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to tidy up. Fold laundry. Distract the ache. Pretend normal was still a place she could reach. That illusion lasted 5 minutes. Until Tristan screamed. She bolted downstairs. He was standing in the living room, face contorted in disgust, holding something in his hand. The St. Christopher medallion. Julian's gift. Tristan's eyes were wide with accusation. "What were you to him, Serafina?" "Huh? Don't tell me this was just some brother-sister thing." Serafina shook her head fast, almost violently. No, of course not. We're siblings. That's all. Just siblings." Tristan didn't blink. He reached into the small wooden box sitting beside the medallion and pulled out a bundle of folded paper. Letters. Love letters. In her handwriting. Words she could never say aloud, but had once dared to write. There, in ink, were the truths she had buried beneath years of denial. Because the truth was, Tristan had always cried too easily, and she'd always protected him. Like a mother. Like a shield. They weren't blood siblings, not really, born of different fathers, but they were raised together, clinging to each other in the absence of consistent love. Somewhere along the way, that line blurred. And what was once innocent had become something she couldn't explain. Couldn't undo. Something Julian had seen but never voiced. Something that had festered in the silence. And now? Now it was all unraveling at once. The disgust in Tristan's eyes hit her like a slap. "I never thought. We're supposed to be siblings. And you, how could you have those kinds of feelings for me? Don't you think that's disgusting? You had a husband, Serafina. I have a girlfriend." His words shattered the last of her defenses. She opened her mouth to deny it, to push it all away again, but something snapped. Something sharp and reckless surged to the surface, and she blurted out. "Then what about you? You got furious every time I took too long to reply. You kissed me, mouth to mouth, when I was sick, when I was married." Tristan's disappointment was immediate and thick in the air. "I thought it was just a kiss. Just instinct. No big deal. You used to do that when I was little, remember? On my birthday when I wouldn't take medicine, you used to kiss me like that to trick me into swallowing." Serafina froze. The floor beneath her seemed to collapse. So she'd been wrong all along? All those charged glances, the ambiguous gestures, had they all been one-sided? Had she really built an entire narrative out of echoes and shadows? Now exposed, now seen for what it was, a mess of blurred lines and misplaced affection, this ugly truth stripped her raw. Tristan hurled the medallion and letters to the floor with a loud clang. His jaw clenched, eyes hard. "I'm done. Don't ever look for me again." He turned to leave. But even in that final moment, he couldn't resist twisting the knife just a little deeper. "We're finished. Don't call. Don't explain. Just, let it die." Serafina collapsed to the ground, her knees crashing to the floorboards. Grief, shame, and desperation flooded through her like a wave too big to breathe through. She reached out, grabbed his wrist, pleading. "Tristan. Please, don't do this. We've always been there for each other. It's always been you and me. I gave up Julian for you, I got divorced because of you. We can go back. I swear. I'll never cross that line again. Just, help me. Please help me explain things to Julian, tell him it wasn't what it looked like." But Tristan yanked his arm from her grip like her touch burned. "Why would I do that? Why would your divorce have anything to do with me? You're unbelievable, Serafina. Wake up. Julian's gone. He left because you were always looking at me. Because you couldn't love him the way he loved you. If I were him, I wouldn't come back either." That day, Serafina lost two people. The one she loved most. And the one who had loved her unconditionally. After wrapping up every last loose end at work, she packed a bag and made a decision. She was going to find Julian. Julian's friends refused to tell her where he'd gone. Cold, stony silence greeted her every time she asked. So she searched herself, calls, records, emails, anything that could give her a lead. All she found was the divorce decree. A single piece of paper. Neatly signed. Stark. Final. Her fingers shook as she held it. That night, the woman once admired for her poise, Serafina, cool and unshakable, fell to her knees in front of a room full of strangers. She bowed her head. Begging. Not for forgiveness. Just for a clue. A direction. A chance to find the man she'd finally learned how to miss, too late. Julian's friends, despite their anger, relented in the end. They told her, reluctantly, that Julian had gone to the UK. A girl had helped him get there, sponsored his master's program. Beyond that, they knew nothing. Serafina did something she never thought she would, she bowed her head and whispered. "Thank you." Within days, her paperwork was done. She packed light, the wedding ring Julian had left behind. His favorite snacks. And, oddly heavy in her bag, their marriage certificate. The whole flight, her mind ran wild with images of what it might be like to see him again. Would he be angry? Would his eyes turn red with hurt? She told herself she didn't care what he wanted to do next, she'd follow. As long as he still loved her. When she finally saw him, he was stepping out of a classroom on a drizzly British afternoon. There was something ghostly about him. His expression flat, eyes dulled. Like the world no longer held much meaning. Walking beside him was a woman Serafina instantly recognized from the photos she'd dug up online, Sloane. The benefactor. The one who had pulled Julian out of that wreckage of a life and onto a plane. Sloane was radiant in a chaotic sort of way, like someone who'd never learned to dim herself for anyone else. She practically skipped up to him, grinning like a kid. "Julian." She bounced in front of him like a butterfly that refused to be swatted away. "Did you finish your paper yet? Let me see it. Come on, come on. That's a direct order from your superior officer." Julian barely glanced at her. His gaze wandered to the window, his face unreadable. He didn't reply. Some whispered he'd gone cold. That he looked like he didn't care about anything anymore. That he was just drifting. What they didn't know was that, in the dead of night, Julian still woke up drenched in sweat. Dreams of her, always her, would leave him gasping for breath, haunted. That was when the cruelest truth hit him. His mind might not love her anymore. But his body still did. It went on like that for 3 long months. Then something shifted. Julian started getting tattoos. He picked up music again. Not for art. For survival. He needed the pain of the needle, the pulse of the beat, the hum of lyrics, to fill the hollow in his chest. He taught himself guitar. Started singing in a pub down the street. It was at one of his first gigs that it happened. A group of lowlifes wandered in, drunk and looking for trouble. They zeroed in on Sloane. Got grabby. Julian saw red. He stepped in. Pushed back. It escalated fast. The punk stormed the bar, smashed his guitar to pieces. The crowd scattered in terror. Except for one person. Sloane. She planted herself in front of Julian like a shield, eyes blazing. Back the hell off. She reached into her coat, flashing something sharp, something expensive. Touch him again and I swear to God, I'll have my father put every one of your heads in AF *****ing box. The room froze. Sloane didn't. She didn't back down. She stood there trembling but fierce, and in that moment, something inside Julian cracked. Not healed. But cracked. Sloane had stood in front of him the way Serafina once did, arms outstretched, shielding him from the world. And that was what broke him. The last bit of armor he'd managed to hold on to cracked, then crumbled completely. Julian let out a hollow, almost mocking laugh, disbelief etched into every syllable. Sloane? What the hell are you doing? He pushed off her touch like it burned. Don't act like you care. God, it's disgusting. Can't you just stay away from me? Get out of my face. You're so damn annoying, don't you get that? Sloane froze. Those big, bright eyes, usually so full of mischief, darkened in an instant, brimming with tears. She didn't say a word. She just turned and bolted out of the bar, her footsteps echoing behind her like something breaking. Julian didn't chase her. Didn't even flinch. He just collapsed backstage in the corner, laying down like a man trying to disappear. The bar's owner, Maeve, wandered over with a sigh and a knowing shake of the head. She leaned against the wall beside him, arms crossed, her voice laced with dry humor. Not exactly the way to treat a girl who just stood between you and a broken bottle. You seriously can't tell? That kid is crazy about you. Julian didn't open his eyes. He muttered a curse under his breath. I don't deserve her. And he meant it. Sloane wasn't just any girl, she was the only daughter of one of the world's wealthiest tycoons. She'd pulled him from the wreckage of his life, paid for everything, and in return, he'd signed a contract, 3 years of companionship, and then they'd both move on. It was nothing. A transaction. Or so he told himself. They had no future. He wouldn't let there be one. Julian already knew the best outcome for someone like him was to vanish, quietly, painlessly, maybe in some place where no one would find him. But Sloane wasn't done. The next day, she showed up again, like nothing had happened. Chirping away, loud and cheery, like she hadn't just cried herself to sleep over him. Julian blinked at her in confusion. He couldn't figure her out, and it annoyed him more than he liked to admit. He ignored her. Still slept through lectures, barely touched his guitar unless he had to. Sloane started handing in his homework for him. He never even noticed when the assignments got done. Until one afternoon, as the lecture hall emptied, she leaned toward him with an almost childlike softness in her voice, like a question too delicate to say out loud. Julian? He didn't look at her. You know what you are? You're like fog. I reach out to hold you, and for a second I think I've got you. But then you slip right through. She paused. So tell me. What do you like? What makes you happy? I'll learn. Whatever it is, I'll figure it out. Julian edged away from her slightly. Still silent. Still unmovable. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Not anymore. Every time Julian left his flat, she was there. Sloane. Trailing behind like a shadow. A stubborn, relentless little shadow. Someone shouted at her once, called her clingy, annoying, a leech. She just turned around, stuck out her tongue, and made a face so exaggerated it was almost comical. "Mind your business," she said with a grin that could melt glaciers. She was radiant like spring sunlight. That brightness, that warmth, it only made Julian feel worse. Worse than he'd ever expected. Because he knew exactly what he was. And he knew what she was. They came from two different worlds, parallel lines that were never meant to touch, let alone cross. There would never be a future between them. He didn't want there to be. But Sloane, God, she was persistent. That naive, fearless kind of teenage infatuation that believed it could overpower reality itself. Julian caught her out of the corner of his eye, trailing him again, that silly little bounce in her step. That night, instead of heading straight backstage, he walked into the bar's front lounge. A handful of women were already deep into their cocktails, some drunk, some heartbroken, all of them seeking distraction. He dropped into a seat beside Maeve, who was nursing her own drink. Without a word, he reached out and wiped a smear of lipstick from the corner of her mouth. "Let me drink for you," he murmured, taking her glass. Maeve blinked, caught off guard. But then she followed his gaze, and saw Sloane in the doorway. A small figure, quiet, hesitant. Watching. That's when Maeve understood. Maybe Julian was trying to prove a point. Or maybe, he was trying to forget something he didn't want to remember. She didn't ask. She simply let herself lean against his shoulder, warm and just a little bit drunk. For a brief moment, her pulse fluttered, because this was Julian. Always distant. Always in control. Yet now, here he was, beside her. Still, he didn't touch her. Didn't flirt. Didn't even meet her eyes. He was just there. It was all calculated. All deliberate. Even his silence. Sloane stood still for a moment longer, then dropped her head and turned away. "Hey, don't leave," she called out behind her, voice slightly slurred. "Have one more with me." But Julian was already gone, heading backstage without a word. He didn't turn around. Didn't explain. He just stood in the shadows, watching her retreating figure disappear into the night. His expression unreadable. That night, when he finally got on stage, his voice was hoarse, raw around the edges, like a heart that had been clawed open. He didn't care that his pitch faltered, or that the lyrics sounded broken. He wasn't singing for them anyway. He wasn't even singing for her. Julian had never been classically handsome, but in that bar, under dim lights and fading neon, he had the kind of cold, elusive beauty that drew people in whether they meant to be drawn or not. Women came just to watch him perform. To wonder what it would take to make him look at them the way he looked at the floor, or his guitar, or the past. He never noticed. He played. He left. He took his cut and walked away. Maeve always said the same thing when he did. "You're the coldest damn man I've ever met." He never argued. Because deep down, he knew she was right. But what Julian didn't expect, was the next morning. There she was again. Sloane. Waiting beneath the same tree. He thought he'd scared her off the night before. Thought she'd finally realized how cold he could be. But today, she looked like a soldier marching to war, fearless, eyes blazing. "Julian," she called out, voice sharp as a blade. "Is that what this is? You trying to prove we don't belong in the same world? You think if I know that, I'll finally let you go?" He blinked, still groggy from another sleepless night. He always came early to campus, usually to sleep through class. But she'd beaten him there. He didn't know how long she'd been waiting. Sloane pointed straight at him, her cheeks flushed with determination. Just watch me, Julian. I will make you fall in love with me. I'm not giving up. Her voice echoed across the campus courtyard, like a declaration of war. And then, like the wind, she took off, her lavender-scented shampoo lingering faintly in the air as she ran. Julian stood there, stunned. Frozen. He couldn't offer her anything, not a future, not a promise, not even a real version of himself. He was still standing beneath the tree, dazed, when a voice, soft, familiar, cut through his fog. Julian. His name. Again. Barely above a whisper. He turned, and there she was. Serafina. Standing at the edge of the university gates, her eyes shining with tears, her voice trembling with something between hope and heartbreak. Julian. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. A ghost from another life. But then Serafina's gaze shifted. Caught the silhouette of Sloane, vanishing in the distance. And in that instant, her gentle expression twisted into something else entirely, jealousy. Who is that girl? Serafina was beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare, elegant, distant, untouchable. Her appearance on campus caused an immediate stir. But she brushed off every attempt at conversation. Her cool demeanor froze out classmates eager to introduce themselves. She didn't care. She wasn't here for them. Julian sat at his desk, still reeling. He couldn't believe it. Serafina had come. She was here, at his school. What he didn't know was that Serafina had already been around for a while. Quietly, in the background. Watching. Waiting. She'd followed him for days, never too close, never too far. She saw everything. Her Julian looked different now. Thinner. Worn. And worst of all, he didn't smile anymore. That was the first thing that broke her. But Serafina couldn't just appear out of nowhere without a reason. She needed a pretext, a story, a way to justify her presence. So she waited. And waited. Until one day, she couldn't take it anymore. Until she saw that girl, standing by Julian's side, smiling like she belonged there. That was when Serafina finally understood what it meant to panic. To be afraid of losing someone for good. Julian? Serafina's voice was soft. Almost tender. She stepped in front of him in the middle of campus, right under the gazes of at least a dozen onlookers, smiling as though the world around them didn't matter. What do you want for lunch? Julian barely lifted his eyes. His face darkened. That flicker of calm he'd fought so hard to maintain? Gone. Get lost. Who asked you? His voice was sharp, like a slap across the face. Sloane, standing nearby, instantly stepped in, her voice rising with panic she didn't yet understand. You should leave. Julian doesn't like you. Serafina turned toward the girl. Calm. Icy. Her expression unreadable. But her words, sharp as glass wrapped in silk. He does. Or at least, he used to. For 7 years. Then, without another word, she smiled and walked away. She thought, maybe he just needed time. But Julian? Julian was already at his limit. His chest felt tight, like the air around him had grown too thin to breathe. And poor Sloane, she believed Serafina. Her confidence cracked. That night, Julian went to the bar again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Both women followed. Serafina, dressed in a way that made the whole bar fall silent when she walked in, barely glanced at anyone else. Her eyes were locked on one person, the man on stage. Julian. Backstage, Sloane hovered near him, clutching a bottle of water. Julian. You need to hydrate, here. Serafina appeared just behind her, holding a thermos in both hands. I made you honey tea. Your favorite. Maeve, watching from the corner, let out a low whistle. "Damn, kid. Two at once? You've got some nerve." But Julian didn't feel lucky. He felt like he was suffocating. He shoved past them both, grabbed his guitar, and stormed out the back door, into the night. Down by the riverbank, he walked until the lights faded and only the sound of water kept him company. He sat. Said nothing. And soon, Serafina found him. She didn't speak, just lowered herself beside him in the quiet. He wanted to say something, anything, but by the time he turned to her, she was gone. Left in her place, a brand new guitar pick. She'd noticed his old one was cracked and useless. Julian stared at the gift in his palm. Then, without hesitation, flicked it into the river. "Don't come back, Serafina." He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. He just stood and left. That night, he slept on the grass in the middle of a public park. Nothing but stars above and music looping in his head like a broken record. And when he woke up at dawn, there it was. A thin blanket draped over him. He didn't need to ask who left it. Julian knew Serafina wasn't the type to give up. Not easily. And for the past month, she hadn't. It became a routine, her showing up, quiet but persistent, always hovering just close enough to be noticed. And while the rest of the campus treated her like some tragic heroine out of a love story, they treated him like the villain. It didn't help that he looked like a shell of himself, tired, unshaven, cold. Whispers started. Then came the paper balls, crumpled insults flung at his back when no one thought he was looking. By the time he realized what was happening, he was being bullied, by a crowd. And Serafina? She stepped in, wordlessly, fiercely. The way he once had for her. She'd take the hits now. The rumors. The side eyes. She deflected them all like armor. Julian said nothing. Grew quieter by the day. Sometimes it felt like if he just stopped speaking altogether, he might disappear. But something shifted. One morning, he knocked on her door. After a month of silence, a month of her bringing him breakfast and lunch without so much as a nod in return, he came to her. Serafina, opening the door in her oversized sweater and mismatched socks, stared at him like a kid who'd just been handed a lifetime supply of candy. "Really?" she whispered, eyes wide. "You mean it, Julian?" At the sound of his name, he flinched. Then looked away. "Don't call me that," he muttered. They arranged to meet at the bar that evening. Maeve had cleared the place, no customers, no staff. Just the two of them and the echo of things unspoken. Julian curled into the leather couch like a ghost. His skin pale, his eyes sunken. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Serafina sat across from him, fingers twisted together, trying to hold herself back. For once, she didn't rush in, didn't demand, didn't cry. She waited. Julian stared at her, blinking slowly. This wasn't the Serafina he remembered. The wild girl who always said too much too fast. Who had no patience for anything she couldn't conquer in a week. But this version? She'd cooked for him every day. Cleaned up after him. Protected him from a world that clearly didn't want him around. And she did it all without expecting a thank you. It made his chest ache. Even he had to admit, this wasn't the Serafina he used to know. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. She sat across from him, carefully, like even the sound of her breathing might shatter the silence between them. Julian looked straight at her, and for once, there was no evasion in his voice. "Serafina," he said, voice low, steady. "I know I can't talk you out of this. But I don't love you anymore." Serafina dropped her gaze. She'd known it was coming, could feel the weight of it long before he said the words. But hearing it still knocked the air from her lungs. "I'm not here asking for forgiveness," she whispered. I just want to make it right. I know I don't deserve to be forgiven." The words were barely audible. She sounded like someone hollowed out, stripped of everything that once made her proud. There was no fight in her voice, only surrender. And that, somehow, made Julian angrier. He leaned forward, cold fury rising in his chest, words like daggers tearing out of him. "You think you're here to redeem yourself? You think you're some kind of savior?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "You ruined me, Serafina. You already killed me once. What do you want, another shot?" Serafina flinched, frozen in place. Then, without a word, she stood. She bowed, just slightly, deeply enough to say, "I hear you, even if it breaks me." Then she turned and fled. No last words. No backward glance. Julian didn't move. The bar sat in silence around him, shadows stretching long like ghosts across the floor. And he looked like one of them. Hollowed. Gone. But that night, that very night, fate shifted. A phone call. His mother had collapsed. The diagnosis, late-stage cancer. Terminal. No treatment plan. No hope. Julian dropped everything. He rushed back home like a man possessed, heart hammering with a panic he hadn't felt in years. By the time he reached the hospital, he stood frozen at the edge of the doorway, staring at the still figure lying in the hospital bed. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Mom." When Sloane arrived, breathless from the transatlantic flight, she found Julian sitting alone in a hard plastic chair, slouched forward with his hands limp between his knees. He didn't look up. She didn't say a word, just threw herself into his arms and held on like the world might disappear. Her tears soaked through his shoulder. And only then did it hit him. Reality. Grief. Fear. All of it. He clung to her, his voice shaking. "Am I going to lose her? Am I going to be the kid without a mom?" Sloane clutched his hand tighter. "No," she said, again and again, as if saying it could will the universe to listen. "No. You won't. She'll live a long, long life. She has to." Julian's father, Scott, stepped out of the hospital room, looking gaunt and sallow under the fluorescent lights. When his eyes landed on Julian, his voice was quiet, almost mechanical. "You're here," he said. "Go see your mom." Sloane trailed silently behind Julian into the room. And that was when she saw, truly saw, what cancer does to a body. Julian's mother looked like a ghost, skin pale as wax, eyes sunken, a kind of stillness that screamed louder than any pain. Death had not yet arrived, but it was circling, closer than anyone wanted to admit. Julian froze. Then he broke. He bolted from the room like something inside him had snapped, sprinting through the corridor until he collided straight into Scott. Paperwork went flying, hospital bills, treatment costs, things no family was ever ready to face. Julian bent down to collect them without a word. "Go back to school," Scott said, not looking at him. "I've got this." Julian didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight in his chest made speaking impossible. Sloane quietly led him away. In that moment, Julian felt something shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was like waking up in a different body. Older. Heavier. Later that night, standing outside the hospital room alone, he reached into his backpack and pulled out every crumpled bill he had, every dollar he'd earned singing in bars, every tip, every late-night gig. He handed the wad of cash to Scott without saying a word. Scott blinked, caught off guard. But he took it. Because in the face of illness, pride was a luxury no one could afford. Sloane stayed by his side. She ran errands. Called doctors. Held space. Until one day, she simply disappeared. When she came back, she was smiling like always, teasing him about his hair, his shoelaces, his weird habit of sleeping with one earbud in. But Julian noticed something he hadn't seen before. A crack in the smile. A sadness she tried hard to bury. They stood together in the hospital's small garden, surrounded by sterile hedges and dying roses. Sloane reached out and gently tugged the sleeve of his hoodie. Julian opened his mouth, but she beat him to it. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Just, let me stay like this. For a little while." And in that moment, Julian understood. The joke was over. Her parents had finally drawn the line. They were pulling her out. Back to school. Away from him. Because they couldn't stand watching their daughter waste her youth chasing after some washed-up bar singer with a broken past. She had fought back. Of course she had. But in the end, it hadn't mattered. "I'm leaving, you know that, right?" Sloane stood in the moonlight, her voice tight but unwavering. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. "You always ask me why I liked you. Why I followed you around like some lost puppy. So here it is. At first, I helped you just because you were too calm, too damn calm, for someone who'd almost died. It pissed me off. Made me curious." She took a shaky breath. "But then, that day, when the others were laughing behind my back, calling me easy, saying I was some flirty little mess, you were the only one who said, 'That's not true.' You don't even remember it, do you? It was nothing to you. Just a line. But to me? I don't have real friends, Julian. Not really. I saved you because I wanted to feel like I had someone. Just one person. I hate this school. I don't know how to deal with the guys here. They gross me out. But when I was near you, nobody touched me." She stepped closer. Her voice cracked, but her gaze stayed steady. "I like you, Julian." And then she kissed him. Fast. Soft. Brief. Before he could speak, she turned and ran. Her figure disappeared into the silver light, her footsteps fading across the pavement. Julian stood rooted in place, watching her silhouette grow smaller and smaller, until there was nothing left but moonlight and silence. Somewhere deep in his memory, he thought of an old anime he'd once seen as a kid, Sailor Moon. And in that moment, he wished for her the same thing he'd once wished for that fictional girl, that she'd become a warrior in her own universe. A protector. A survivor. He didn't chase after her. Didn't call her name. He just turned. And walked in the opposite direction. Because some stories aren't meant to last. Some paths cross for just a brief, fleeting chapter, and that's more than enough. Julian never saw Serafina again. Not once. He dropped out of school in the UK and returned to LA for good. No farewells. No explanations. Just the weight of everything he hadn't said. He took a job singing at a small bar, full-time now. Day and night. Any shift, any pay. At first, Maeve had messaged him constantly, begging him not to overwork himself. But once she understood the real reason, the illness, the fear, she stopped trying to talk him out of it. Quietly, from across the ocean, she started searching for easier gigs back in California. Anything that would take the edge off. Eventually, Maeve moved back from England and opened a new bar. She hired Julian as the regular. By then, he'd started drinking. A lot. Night after night. The regulars loved him. Female customers tipped him generously, sometimes more than he made singing. And all the while, his mother's illness didn't wait. It didn't slow down. Neither did Julian. He aged fast. Faster than anyone should have to. But what he didn't know was that Serafina never truly left. She helped in ways he'd never notice, slipping extra tips into the chaos of crowded nights, leaving behind envelopes when no one was watching. Sometimes, when Julian wasn't home, she'd stop by the hospital and sit quietly by his mother's bed, reading or folding laundry or just being there. Not for him, but for the pieces of him that were too broken to ask for help. She came and went like wind, quiet, sudden, and impossible to hold on to. Julian never saw her coming. Now, he was packing the last of his things. Maeve's bar was closing. She'd tried to keep it alive, truly. But in a city like this, without connections or clout, even the best dreams ran out of breath. Julian showed up on the last night. The place felt heavier than usual, empty even before the furniture was gone. Maeve poured him a drink. No ceremony. Just two friends in a dying room. She raised her glass with a crooked smile and asked, "So what are you going to do now?" Before he could answer, she cut him off. "I'm getting married," she said lightly. "I'm 35. Time to settle down, right?" Julian nodded. As if he'd heard her. As if the words meant something. He didn't know what to say. So he said the only thing he could. "Congratulations." Maeve let out a short, bitter laugh. "God, you're boring." 2 more drinks later, her edges started to blur. She stared into her glass, then into the past. "I used to think I'd never get married," she said, voice low. "Thought I'd live wild, date whoever I wanted, string together a dozen flings with pretty boys like you." She glanced up, smiled faintly. There was something warm in it, sad, but soft. "But reality is what it is," she added. "Your mother ends up in the hospital. And I get married." She laughed again, but this time, her eyes shimmered. She raised her glass to him one last time. "To you. Meeting you was enough." And with that, she downed her drink and walked out, head high. He never saw Maeve again. Julian gave up music not long after. He didn't have time to be an artist anymore. He needed money. Fast. So he took the fastest path, the factory. Manual labor. Long hours. Little pay. Nothing like who he used to be. He started telling dirty jokes. Talking like the kind of man he used to hate. He carried the weight of his broken family on his back like an anvil. He became like an old ox, exhausted, scarred, and one bad day away from collapse. He worked day and night, sleeping on concrete floors, numbing the pain with cheap liquor during his breaks. Scott worked with him. Same grind, same fate. There wasn't much else to do. That New Year's Eve, Julian spent in a hospital bed, hooked up to N4, his breath tight with fatigue. He was different now. Hardened. Older. And that was when he saw her. It was the middle of the night, and Serafina, yes, her, was there in the hospital room, wiping down his mother's frail body with quiet care. He hadn't seen her in so long. She looked different. Older. Tired. Real. She flinched when she saw him. Tried to leave before he could say anything. But for the first time in his life, Julian reached out and grabbed her hand. "Since when?" he asked. His voice was rough, not angry, but searching. "How long have you been doing this?" She looked away, panicked, guilty. She didn't want to speak. Didn't want to explain. She knew he had every right to hate her. But his hand stayed on hers. Calloused now. Rough with labor. It scratched against her soft palm. The scrape tickled slightly. She didn't pull away. Not yet. Serafina had been cast out. Stripped of the Thorns' wealth and protection, she and Tristan had finally split, and for the first time, she was alone. Just a woman. Just herself. No titles, no legacy. No illusion. Julian found her again not as his wife, not as a stranger, but as someone quietly helping his mother stretch her stiff limbs beneath the sterile glow of hospital lights. She moved with care. Without complaint. He watched her from the doorway, still unsure if she was real. After a long silence, he asked quietly, "When did you learn how to do all this?" She didn't look up. Didn't speak. He realized, suddenly, how long it had been since she'd looked him in the eyes. Since she'd said anything at all. He glanced down at his hands, cracked, calloused, marked by work that broke the body long before the soul. For the first time in years, he felt disgusted by himself. Still, he cleared his throat and spoke, awkward, uncertain. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "I mean it. Thank you." It was clumsy. Too small. But it was all he had. It was nearly 2 in the morning. He asked if she'd eaten. She shook her head. Apparently, she'd been coming to care for his mother for years now, quietly, unnoticed, always before dawn, always gone before he arrived. She had learned how to be invisible. He took her downstairs to a corner diner that never closed. He ordered a plate of spaghetti, then remembered, she never liked noodles. He opened his mouth to order something else, to take that dish for himself. But she'd already started eating. Without a word. No protest. Just hunger. The kind of hunger that doesn't care what the food is. Without her family's name, Serafina was no longer untouchable. She had no money, no connections, no armor. And yet, she endured. Julian watched her shovel pasta into her mouth, cheeks hollow from stress, hands trembling just slightly from exhaustion. He'd never seen her like this. He'd always thought of her as pristine. Elegant. Cold. But now? Now she looked like someone who had survived. They didn't talk much after dinner. The silence was comfortable, or maybe just heavy. He offered a walk. She nodded. They ended up by the river, where the light bounced off the surface in silver fragments. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that made people speak truths they usually kept buried. Julian sat on a bench, elbows on knees, staring at the water. He didn't know what to say. So she spoke first. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you think I'm pathetic now?" He didn't respond. She kept going. "Do you think I'm just ordinary?" A pause. "Because I've never felt so happy." He looked over. Her face was soft. Not broken, not bitter, just honest. "I came back," she said, to atone. Julian didn't answer. Didn't nod. Didn't speak. He just listened. As if she were a stranger sitting next to him on a park bench. Someone with no past. No name. No shared history. Reality had changed him. Changed her, too. The pressure of survival was heavier than any heartbreak. And in that still moment, neither of them remembered the mansion. The dinner parties. The cold hands that used to hold champagne flutes. They were just two people, sitting by a river at night, beneath a broken sky. Julian broke the silence with a question neither of them expected. "How's Tristan?" He wasn't sure why he asked. Maybe because, in that strange, twisted world they had lived in for so long, Tristan had always been the thread connecting them. No matter how bitter, no matter how painful, he was the one constant. Serafina let out a breath. Then, suddenly, she smiled. A sad, almost ridiculous smile. "He told me I was disgusting," she said quietly. "That I was sick for ever having feelings for him." Julian blinked. That was the first time she had said it aloud, named it for what it was. He looked at her, studying the curve of her shoulders in the moonlight. "Do you think there's any way back?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated. Then let out a laugh, low and bitter. "There's no going back," she said. "Tristan despises me now. I crossed a line you don't come back from." Silence returned. They didn't try to fill it. Serafina stood up, brushing invisible dust from her coat. I should go, she said softly. But, I left something for you. A gift. A big one. I hope you like it. Julian furrowed his brow, confused, but nodded anyway. She turned to leave, the glow of the river dancing against her cheekbones. And just before she stepped into the dark, she looked back at him one last time. Her voice was barely audible. I never regretted loving you, she said. And I never once regretted marrying you. Then she turned and walked away. Julian watched her go. Watched until the dark swallowed her whole. And suddenly, it hit him. Serafina had always been like a meteor, blazing, brief, and impossible to hold. By the time he reached for her, she was already gone. When he returned to the hospital, the doctor approached him with a clipboard. We found a match, the doctor said. Your mother, she has a donor. The kidney transplant can proceed. Julian's heart slammed against his ribs. A donor, he repeated. Yes. The paperwork came through today. It's anonymous. Anonymous. Julian asked for the name anyway, but the report was sealed. He stared at the form, trembling. And that was the last time he ever saw Serafina. Not once after that day. She vanished, utterly, completely, as though the world had simply swallowed her whole. Life is full of regrets. Julian's greatest regret wasn't Serafina. It wasn't Tristan. It was that he didn't pull himself together sooner. That he let the weight break him for so long. That he left his mother drowning in pain while he drank and disappeared. But then again, who lives a life without regret? He thought of all the women he'd met over the years. Maeve, who taught him honesty. Sloane, who reminded him how to laugh. And Serafina, who showed him the thin line between love and destruction. He wished them all well. From the bottom of his heart, he hoped they found peace. Julian's wedding was small, but full. Maeve came, carrying her 3-year-old, who kept stealing desserts off the cake table. She handed Julian a red envelope stuffed with cash and told him not to waste it on anything boring. Sloane flew in from overseas. The moment she landed, she and Julian's bride became inseparable, shopping together, picking out the dress, giggling behind his back. He watched them with a quiet smile, content. And yet, there was someone missing. Serafina. He'd looked for her over the years. Quietly. Patiently. But she was gone, like mist at sunrise. Like the closing of a book. No traces left. No return. Only memory. And in the silence she left behind, Julian finally learned how to let go. Julian tried not to imagine the worst. He preferred to believe that Serafina had returned to the Thorne family. That somewhere far away, she had reclaimed her place, untouchable again, cold as moonlight, beautiful and distant. The woman she once was. Do I look pretty? The voice pulled him from his thoughts. Lily, his bride, twirled in front of him, her white dress flaring softly with her spin. She beamed at him, eyes bright. He blinked, startled by the memory it brought. Serafina had once asked him that, too. Do I look pretty? He smiled gently and pulled Lily into his arms. You look beautiful, he said. So beautiful. Their wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was warm. Full. Friends from both sides came. Laughter echoed in the courtyard. Photographs were taken, champagne poured. It was a simple ceremony, but full of light, full of life. Scott showed up too, smiling ear to ear. My mom's doing better, he told Julian. She's almost ready to be discharged. Julian grinned. He introduced Lily to him like she was already family. Later, someone handed him a glass of wine and said with pride, this bottle? 30 grand. Julian took a sip. And chuckled. Once upon a time, that kind of wine had been routine for him. He'd tasted better, forgotten better. Now it just tasted like memory. His boss came by, clapping him on the shoulder. Julian had recently been promoted to the company's main office. His new job was far easier than the factory floor, traveling, evaluating, overseeing operations. The salary was good. The hours were better. He was, in every way, moving up. That night, with the party in full swing, Julian laughed and drank with everyone. When the room finally started to spin, he leaned into his chair, dizzy and light-headed. "Lily," he said, grinning like a fool. "You go ahead. I'll rest here for a bit." She rolled her eyes, teased him for being a lightweight, and left him alone with a kiss on the cheek. He dozed off not long after. Somewhere between sleep and waking, he felt someone near. A quiet presence. A whisper. "Congratulations, Julian. I'm leaving now." Then, a kiss, soft, almost weightless, pressed against his forehead. He sat bolt upright. His heart raced. His skin was cold. A blanket had been draped over his shoulders. He looked around, expecting to see Lily, but when he asked her later, she shook her head in confusion. "I didn't do that," she said, laughing. "You must have been dreaming. Probably a ghost." "Julian, what are you talking about?" He didn't argue. Didn't insist. There was no point. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Because in his jacket pocket, he found it, the final wedding gift Serafina had promised him. A single gold ring. Delicate. Shaped like a rose in full bloom. It was the ring she had once meant to give him, in another life, at another wedding. He held it in his palm for a long time. He didn't cry. Didn't speak. They had both known this was goodbye. They had both known there was no future for them. But there was still life. Still breath. Still steps to take forward. Because sometimes, love isn't about the ones who stay. Sometimes, it's about the ones who let you go, so you can finally become the person you were meant to be.